So it's 10 minutes past 7. Λέμε καλό μήνα στα ελληνικά. So may we have a great month full of events here at Lexikopoleio. Welcome. That's the second event in English. There's not going to be any translation, so I hope you all know that. A great privilege to have Nikos Vatopoulos once more with us. A great applause from all of you for Nikos Vatopoulos. And his, this great piece of work, with the two books, περιπαντώντας στην Αθήνα, Walking in Athens and Μικροί δρόμοι της Αθήνας. I hope this also comes out in English at some point. Yes. Nikos Vatopoulos, of course, a journalist, writes at Καθημερινή newspaper, and Diane Shugart, co-author of 111 Places in Athens That You Shouldn't Miss. You can find it here as well. Diane will introduce Mr. Vatopoulos, but I don't think he needs an introduction, right? So, an applause for Diane as well. So glad to have you with us. So, let us begin.
Okay. Do I need to practice? Yeah. Hello? Okay. I met Nikos at Kathimerini, where we both worked. I worked there many years ago when they had an English edition that was published by the International Herald Tribune. And we all did our original reporting, but we also translated some of the pieces from the Greek Kathimerini. And Nikos doesn't know this, but we used to actually fight over who got to translate his pieces. And in fact, we used to get together, and I was lucky because one of my colleagues had a fondness for some cake. So I used to bribe him with cake and get to translate Nikos's pieces instead of some other ones. His knowledge of Athens goes beyond the facts, and it goes very, very deeply into a love of the city that comes out very, very strongly in all his books, in all his columns, in all his work. And this book in particular, Walking in Athens, I think the title is perfect because it does identify exactly what you need to do in order to know Athens. And that is to walk. And many Greeks who live, well, mostly everybody who lives in the city complains about it, but I think it's because they're too busy running around the city, getting around the city in their cars, and they don't take the time to walk. And I think if people actually walked and looked around, they would have a far better sense of the city, they would love it more, they would understand it more, and know it better. And knowing a place like a city that's so remarkable in so many ways, you really need to get intimate with it, and walking is the way to do it. Anyway, I will now turn it over to Nikos, who has a lovely presentation to go along with the book, and we'll take it from there.
Thank you, Diane. Thank you all. I'd like to welcome you to Lexikopoleio. Lexikopoleio is a great bookstore. I think it's an Athenian trademark, and I'm really, really happy to see it flourish like that. Well, I think it's a great honor, first of all, to talk about Athens in a public space. Athens has nourished me ever since, and I've been I was born and raised in Athens. My father as well. My mother arrived in Athens when she was 3, from Istanbul, coming from a Greek Catholic family. And what unites their memory is that they grew up in Athens during the German occupation and the Civil War. And I think this is a very crucial beginning for one's understanding of this city. And I grew up with these stories about the war, about Athens in the 40s, in the 50s, in the 60s when I was born. So I was born at a period when Athens was fast changing, and the realization that I was growing up together with the capital city of my country was really spectacular, to think that everything could change so fast. One of my first memory was a lovely house being demolished on Patission Street, which was my area. At that time it was a very common place to live as a middle-class Greek. And I remember how traumatic was the experience to see all these old houses of Athens falling apart within a few years, in the 60s and 70s, and I realized that I need to know more about how this city changes. I think the word change is a very crucial word for me to motivate me to understand this city. First of all, I want to understand, and I want to understand because I love. I think this is crucial, and I'm curious as well. I'm talking about intellectual curiosity, for sure. And I have been exploring the city ever since I was a school student, when I was about 15, 16 years old. And I was walking to school, and I had a camera, and I was trying to capture some of the things that were really touching to my senses, and I have some very amateur photos of that era. But they're quite precious because they're the beginning of my long love affair with Athens. I'm very, very interested in talking about Athens to people that are not Greek, because I understand and I respect the fact that Athens is quite a difficult city to capture and feel at ease. It's quite chaotic, it's not easy to decipher and understand how one could jump from the ancient monuments to the concrete blocks and all these usual stereotypes about the city. So I really like to fight these stereotypes, for sure. And sometimes I have the chance to guide some groups of foreign visitors. And I realized that most of them are really, really, really open to new ideas and to understand the city in a more complex way, which is very, very crucial to me. And I also like to train Greek residents of the city, because I realize that there is a great gap of knowledge, even among Greeks. And this is something that annoys me a lot. But mostly what annoys me a lot is when Greeks snub Athens, when they think that Athens is not worthwhile to cater for, or to understand, or to read and study and think and love. So I have a lot of things to fight for, but first of all, I'm really, really happy that there are so many people interested in this city. And I think that there is a growing interest, especially during the last 10 years with the economic crisis, and but also because we become more mature in our understanding of urban culture globally. I think, personally speaking, I'm more interested now in other cities that are not like very well known, like Paris or Rome or Prague, but lesser known cities around the world. I'm more interested now than I were 10 years ago. I think that there's a growing interest for transcultural, let's say, experiences. So, well, that's a bit about my introduction for my Athenian love affair. This book, first of all, I'm so happy that it has been translated into English, and I thank the Metaixmio Publishers. This book is a selection of my articles published in Kathimerini. Each one is, let's say, a walk in the lesser-known Athens. It's about walking in streets that are not in the normal guidebooks. So this is, I think, an added value to what I do, and this is why I do what I do. The photos are taken by me. They're just to give credit to what I'm writing about, and what I like is to think that maybe a reader could follow my path in the neighborhoods of Athens and discover what I write about and discover more as well. More or less is about this. It's let's say, a not so conventional guidebook, let's say. It's a way to understand the city. It's an introduction to lesser-known Athens. So I think it's good. It's a good idea to look at some photos taken by me. it's a little tour around the city. So we could freely comment and interrupt and ask things and whatever. Diane, I would welcome your comments if you like, if you feel like. I have started this little tour with some city views, which is not, let's say, part of what I write about. But I like, first of all, when I go to a city, to grasp what the city is about, to have a feel of the city, and then to dive into the streets. So we'll start with a nice view towards the Acropolis from a lovely Met's apartment. And what I'm interested in this city is the landscape. You can understand what I'm talking about when you see the following photo, which is approximately from the same angle, taken in 1910 by the Swiss photographer Fred Boissonnat, who visited Greece at the beginning of the 20th century and captured some lovely, lovely shots. So this is the classical landscape of around the Ilissos River, which was one of the main rivers of ancient Athens, commented by Plato as well in one of his Socrates dialogues. And it was famous for the rich vegetation and the lovely views towards the Acropolis and the rest of the classical city. It was part of the suburbs, let's say. And during the Roman times, when the Emperor Hadrian invited many rich Romans to come and settle in Athens, the rich Romans built their villas around the river. So it was a rich suburb during Roman times. So you can see the present situation.
I was just going to ask, and the river now is where? If you can orient us so that we know which...
Oh, yes. Well, it's just before in front of the stadium, the Panathinaikos Stadium, where the first Olympic Games took place.
It's
covered.
largely built over.
Yes, it's covered.
Some of the tram tracks go over it now, which is, I think, one reason why they've had to halt the tram, because the soil underneath is still quite soggy, I guess is the word. So they were afraid of a collapse. But that all used to be the river.
Exactly. You want to ask something?
No, just a short comment.
Yes.
It was covered in 1953. Right. Thank you. It was covered in 1953 after the Marshall Plan.
Yes.
And actually, it is nearby, even the area called Vatrachonisi, which means the Frog Island.
The Frog Island, so because of the...
Yeah, anyway.
The water, yeah.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for your remark. Yes.
Sorry, let me just interrupt briefly. As we go along, instead of waiting for questions until the end, as we go along, if anyone has a comment or a question, it's probably best, because then we can also relate the questions. Nikos can answer based on the photos or...
Sure. Well, as you understand, I love this. It is the only vintage photo I have included in this show. So, this is something that really, really puzzles me. Every time I look at the Acropolis from terraces and rooftops of Athens that are not really, tourist shots. And I had the chance to go to the top of the Alpha Bank building in Klathmono Street, close to Stadiou Street, and I had the chance to have a look at this, the ex-modern blocks of the 50s that one can see over there, and see their derelict situation nowadays, which is one very, very crucial point, issue for Athens to renovate its infrastructure. And this also relates to how we feel when we walk in the city. Many, many buildings are in a poor state of condition, yeah. This from another rooftop towards Kolonaki. And you see the cityscape, how it is, with all these solar planes and airplane, and the flat roofs of the 30s and 50s. And of course, one can see the little wooded Lexikopoleio hill, which was bare hill till the late 19th century. And this is something that the Athenians don't really know for sure, that most of the vegetation in Athens was planned, and all these trees were planted in the late 19th and early 20th century, even later sometimes. Philopappou Hill, which is a great walk from Dionysiou Areopagite to the pedestrian ring. You go up to Philopappou Hill, and over there you can have a lovely view over the city. And here we can see the Acropolis Museum amidst the apartment blocks. Yes, Neapolis. Yes, I love this church as well. It's early 20th century, St. Nicholas Church. Neapolis, you know maybe the name of this neighborhood between Kolonaki and Exarchia. It's part of the core of old Athens, I think. And this is taken from the old school designed by Dimitris Pikionis in the 1930s, and one can see the domes of the church.
I think
Yes.
Neapolis was one of the first Athens. I mean, other than Plaka.
Yes,
I
very
think it was
true.
one of the first neighborhoods to be built as the city expanded.
Exactly. And Neapolis means the new city. It's the same name as the Italian city Naples was called, Neapolis, the new city. So Neapolis means the expansion of old Athens beyond the cluster of houses in Psyri, Monastiraki, Plaka, and around the palace at the Syntagma Square. So this started to happen in the 1860s, and it was densely built by the end of the 19th century, and it was quite, let's say, a very pleasant neighborhood with quite modest houses, some beautiful courtyards, but quite modest. I mean, it was low middle class, let's say, where some more expensive houses, but it was a very Athenian neighborhood, and it was also a place where many students coming from other parts of Greece that wanted to work or study in Athens were trying to have a room there to stay, because it was close to the university. So the National Observatory at the top of the Sacred Hills in Athens, designed by Theophil Hansen in the 1840s. 42, thank you, Mrs. Kasimati. We have the Hansen experts here. So I'm very, very cautious to what I say, so I skip all the info. No, but I love the view, I love the dome, and I think the observatory was the first building that Hansen designed for Athens. It was only 27. 27 years old. Exciting, yes. Thank you. Back in 1842, nobody cared, sure. But it's a lovely building. It's one of his best. Academia Street, taken from another rooftop. We can see the back of the university building. The academy. I love rooftops. Athens has a lot of rooftops, but a lot of flat terraces and flat roofs. Yeah. So, we enter the city now. This is the cover of my second book, The Small Streets of Athens. And it's a gem, I think, of a street, because it's not a very common view to find an Athenian neighborhood with a row of old houses, reminding us how the Athenian neighborhood looked some decades before. This is Remoundou Street, close to Agios Panteleimon Church, close to Acharnon Street, and a neighborhood that is not in its best nowadays. It has a real problem of social cohesion. Most of the old residents have left many decades before. But still this charming street exists, and it's lovely to see the coexistence of different, let's say, functions. There's a residence, there is a nursery home, there is a brothel, there are derelict and empty houses like shells. It's all, everything. Ferron Street is close to Patission and Harnon Street as well. There are these facades of the early 20th century, typical Athenian, two-story houses with courtyards, small courtyards. But one can see the iron railings in different types and designs. Agios Pavlos is another old neighborhood of Athens, close to the Larissa railway station, close to Metaixmio. This is also a typical view that one can see the old Athenian architecture that, let's say, it's late neoclassical, early 20th century, typical Athenian houses, one-story houses or two-story houses, housing one or two families, sometimes with a shop, the ground floor, and small courtyards at the back. The lovely trees of Athens. This is Michail Voda. Michail Voda is still a very busy street, close to Achanon as well, which was a very densely populated residential area. And this is typical houses of the early 20th century that I love to photograph. This is also typical Athens, all these derelict and empty, deserted houses that nobody cares about. Small houses, normally with one or two rooms, a small kitchenette, and probably the bathroom was in the courtyard.
Just, if I may, there is a reason why many of these houses are abandoned, and that has to do with the law and the criteria that you have to fulfill to renovate homes. And some of these laws, when your house is declared under historical preservation, which a lot of these houses have been, it is very difficult to actually get loans and to renovate because you're also limited in what you can do with the house. And that, I think, has had a very negative impact, even though the idea was to preserve the neighbourhoods. I think in many cases it's had a negative impact. And people just let their homes crumble because once the house is gone and it sort of, collapses naturally, they can do what they want on the land. So I just felt I had to say that because it's not that people don't care about the city or don't care about their homes, but sometimes because of circumstances you don't really have a choice.
Yeah, it's quite complicated, I think. Yeah. Yes.
I believe that the law is that you can't change the outer facade, but the inside you can renovate as you will.
Yes, if it is not a listed building.
No, I think that you can do that even with a listed building as long as you keep the outside.
Well, if there is no special decoration in the interior, and then it is a listed building, it's not so easy to change.
No, I mean, I haven't kept up with the law, but I know at one point, if it was, you had to actually get permission to change the interior color. I mean, never mind any renovation. If you wanted to paint your bedroom a different color, you had to get permission.
It depends on the year when it was constructed, actually. Is another part of the law.
So I love to notice the traces of the original color on the old houses, and this is the Pompeian red that one could see at the neoclassical houses of Athens. It was the basic neoclassical colors, let's say, this red, the vivid blue, the cobalt blue, and the light blue, which was normally the friezes, like that. And it's very, very difficult to locate this original red in the old houses. So once I locate one, I take a photo. The staircases, the iron staircases that were at the back of the buildings that are, I think this also belonged to the Athenian urban landscape, don't you think so, Diane? So they're very typical, not only of Athens, of course, it's all over the world, but there are still quite many of these staircases. winding staircases. This is one of my recent photos, and I was really surprised to take this interior in one of one-storied houses in old rain neighborhoods. And I took this photo from a fragment of light from a window. And when I took the photo, I didn't know what I was taking of. So it was when I developed the photo on the screen of my computer, I was really shocked to see this really spectacular, I think, view. And the courtyard with the tree at the back, and all this. It's like an installation, I think. Well, I loved this house when I saw this house in the Psyri area, in a very busy area, full of restaurants, cafes, businesses, and but this wonderful house has been left just with its facade. It's very romantic. It's and you can see another detail. I think it's the following one. You see the detail over the door. I name it the city theater stage. Quite romantic, and I think the architect or the designer was the taste of him was so rich, and he wanted to show everything. So, but it is kept in good taste, I think, although it is too much for decoration of a simple house. But I think it's typical of an era. It's the Athenian Belle Epoque, let's say, early 20th century, I could say. The details all over Athens, I think it's really spectacular to note that it's very difficult to find similar designs. There's so many scattered all over the city. The railings, all the designs, the details you see around the windows. It's not so common, this kind of detail. The plaster decoration. I discovered this, I loved this, 1912. This is a very, very humble house in the Botanikos area, which is a working class area of old Athens, a very old neighborhood, related to the, let's say, early industrial period of the capital in the 19th century. And this is the door of a very, very small, humble house. And I love to think about the proprietor thinking of having this date ornating the Iron Gate. I think it's really, really touching. 1912 was the date when of the Balkan Wars, when Greece expanded towards the north. Maybe it is related to that, I don't know. So, details, Athenian details, the Athenian cherubs, I think that's very, very typical of the Athenian, let's say, neoclassicism, the aestheticism of the 19th century. And this is a design that survived in many different versions all over the city. In rich and poor houses, it was, I think, the most popular design. And of course, its origin, it's, let's say, Italian Renaissance maybe, or French Romanticism. But all these influences have been filtered into the small neighborhoods of Athens. And this is, I think, fascinating. To think that all these origins have been filtered down to a very humble way of living. I think it's very unique to the Athenian neighborhood. We see again the cherubs and another version of this design. Psyri area, another abandoned house with a small garden on top because of what's happened. And this is also not so common, the design. You see that there's not a lot of space to have a spacious, let's say, balconies, but still they found a solution to keep it small and elegant. Sure.
It's, while we have the picture, I would like to have your opinion on the street art that we have currently in Athens.
The graffitis and the tagging, yes.
Yeah.
Well, I hate tagging, but I'm more open to street art, of course. Well, it depends. I don't like this kind of tagging, but I have seen some wonderful street art, and I have started collecting by photos the street art of Athens, and I think some of it should be preserved or at least photographed and archived. I think it's part of the urban culture of Athens, for sure. Well, this particular photo, I don't think it's something worthwhile. I think it's close to vandalism, although it's not vandalism. But it's, let's say, it's when you go a little bit beyond the lines, the limit. I'm open to people who want to leave something beautiful. I'm against it towards all the acts that want to vandalize.
Sorry, just to say something.
Yes.
A few days ago, we had here the young people that were making street art, graffitis, political ones.
Yes.
And they were saying that they were a little bit annoyed by the fact that all this political street art was beginning to be a tourist attraction.
Yes.
That annoyed them a lot.
Yes, first of all, because it takes away the weapon. I mean, the reason that we have political street art, if you use it as a touristic attraction, then it doesn't have any political point.
Could I just make a comment?
Sure.
I think it depends on whose wall it is. If it's on my wall, it's vandalism. If it's on your wall, maybe you like it.
You're so right.
Yeah, good point.
Well, I loved these colors in a Metz old house, the Metz area, quite near here, and I love the combination of blue and pink, which were the original, let's say, stereotypical colors for boys' room and girls' room in the early 20th century. But this is just an idea. But I loved all this. I collect the traces of colors and stones on old houses demolished. I call this still life because it was a neglected, abandoned house in the area called Lophos Skouzes. Lophos means hill. Skouzes was a banker and politician who bought a large piece of land close to Kolonos historic neighborhood in the 19th century. And by the 1920s, his family started selling the property, and all this was divided in lots, and so building up started. And we have a lot of houses that are now old, from the 20s and 30s in that historic neighborhood. So one of those 20s houses was deserted, so I took a glimpse through the door and I saw this, I think, lovely view. Again, another interior I discovered just 3 days ago. This is on Peoniou Street, which is quite a large street in close to Acharnon. It's a lovely house, a two-story house, early 20th century, in a lovely deep red color, which is quite unusual for Athens, which is usually beige ochre or grey. But this vivid red color was really attracting my attention, so I went near and I saw through the door this view, this lovely staircase. This is in another historic neighborhood called Akademia Platonos, Plato's Academy, which is what the name says. It's close to where the ancient original location of Plato's Academy was, and there is an archaeological park over there. The area used to be quite for low-income families, but we have lovely, lovely houses. I love the colors, of course, of this one, which are very vivid and unusual, and remind me of, let's say, the vernacular culture of small town and villages around Greece. This one is next to the previous one, and it originates also from the 1920s. It's a typical one-bedroom Athenian house of that era, with a courtyard where one could also find extra rooms sometimes to rent, or not, or just a bathroom, or just a place to wash clothes. It was not very easy to live those houses at those times, but it was common for all the people, so it was not something special. There was no central heating, of course. You had to have extra heating of your own. There was no hot water. You had to boil your water, and of course the bathroom facilities were practically non-existent until the 1930s, when we had the first modern apartments, or the late 20s in the rich neighborhoods. This is Met's area. I loved the view. I loved all this poetic, let's say, ambience of the old neighborhood. At that street one can see also the Acropolis in the frame, and I think it's very typical Athens. I think I love the title here, and this is what I strive for, and I think it's the added value, the neglected value of Athens, that this special low-scale culture that developed in this city for tens of thousands of people, hundreds of thousands of people living in quite humble conditions, I think, but they're quite happy, and they were loving their surroundings, I think, in a way that today we cannot really understand and appreciate. I mentioned before the variety of designs, and the same applies to doors. Such a rich variety. This is also in Metz, a beautiful door. I was surprised to find this one in Kato Patissia area. I think it has a strong arts and crafts influence, although, of course, the arts and crafts trend was the late 19th century. This is 1920s, 30s in Athens, but still one can see how all these influences came to Athens and developed their own versions.
Yes, I mean, I think one of the reasons why you see far more different styles in Athens is because when people migrated from the islands or from the villages to the city, they built homes in the style with which they were accustomed to. That's why you have Anafiotika, which is very Cycladic. You have more, you have homes resembling those from the mountains and from mountainous areas, even in Petralona and other places, in Gazi and Patissia. You have very different styles because people built what they knew and what they had lived in and what was familiar to them.
Very correct, yes. And sometimes with stones or... in the 1910s and 20s, we have... let's say, a divorce with a classical style in Athens, and neoclassicism was outdated, of course. There was a new way of building houses. There was new technology as well, and I think the residents of Athens were more open to new styles. Of course, Jugendstil was not new in the 1920s, but for Athens it was something new. Let's say it was... a freestyle, taking divorce from classical, rigid Athenian neoclassicism. So this is in Acharnon Avenue, which, as I mentioned before, it was a residential area with middle-class families, and there was a lot of variety of all these styles bridging classicism to modern style in the 20s. This is in Gizi area, close to Alexandras Avenue, which is also a typical 1920s three-story house, which is neglected, deserted now. But one can see the difference from the previous early 20th century classical style. Okay. Of course, Art Deco is all around Athens. Athens is... I think one of the Mediterranean capitals of Art Deco and modern movement and Bauhaus, and I'm really, really curious to see if the city of Athens will have the chance to say to the world that we also have this heritage here. As you know, Tel Aviv is the capital of Bauhaus in the area. Of course, there's a beautiful concentration of Bauhaus and Art Deco and modern style buildings in Israel, but Athens as well. And Tel Aviv is called the White City because of the white color of the Bauhaus buildings there. In Athens, we did not have the white color so much in the 30s movement. We had also mostly the darker color of the German influence, the Central European influence. And this was one of the main criticisms. I read sometimes articles in the press of the 1930s criticizing this foreign architecture that is so dark for the Athenian Mediterranean climate. But the style of Art Deco is quite light, I think, and it suits well with the way of life here. And this is also in Gizi area. The previous one is surprisingly enough in Sepolia area, which is a rather low middle class area. This is in Gizi, which is a more stylish. Yes, could be Agres also. This is in Pipinu Street, close to Acharnon. You see the variety and the rift from classicism. This is in Patissia. Two-story houses with 2 or 3 or 4 apartments, 1930s. I was surprised to find this street that looks nice and very, very nice gardens and nice houses of the 1930s. This is in Lofos Kouzei, in the hill I told you before, which is for Athenians that do not know their city, it's considered a very, let's say, working class area. And one can see these houses and this beautiful road. And I was really surprised to notice that the variety of interwar architecture scattered all around the city. And I was really surprised to find this beautiful house that one could see, let's say, in an area like Neo Psychiko. Could be Stamos Papadakis. Is it? Do you think it is? Looks like. Yes, looks like we should investigate. Yes, thank you, Marilena. Yes, Stamos Papadakis, as Ms. Kasimatis told us, Stamos Papadakis was a prominent architect of the 1930s, a purist modernist. Okay, thank you, Marilena. Yes. The lovely stories behind successful men, yes. This is, of course, a 1930s apartment building, not of the very luxurious variety, but showing that the new trend was there and all the new housing was following the new style. Concluding, I would like to say a few things about the 1950s Athens. When I was very young, there was no appreciation for the 1950s. It was too recent, too common, no one cared. It was something that suits you to live better, let's say in more luxurious apartments, but that's it. But I think gradually we discovered the 1950s style. It is very prominent, very, I think, fashionable all around the world to see the mid-century style in a different light. And I have grown a very, very warm feelings for 1950s Athens, even 1960s Athens.
Yeah, I think part of the problem is up until recently, we always thought of that period as being destructive, as
exactly.
a period when a lot of buildings went up, a lot without particular planning. But when you look at it now, I think you can see a lot of value and a lot of very interesting things architecturally.
Yes, yes. And also because many of these buildings replaced the old houses. I mean, after the 70s, there was a traumatic experience, let's say, realizing that Athens was a mess, you know, after all these decades of building up without planning as it should be. Although I want to say that complaining about Athens was something very, very old. I mean, even in the 19th century, they were complaining about the mess of the city. And of course, in the 20s and 30s. In the 20s, when we had the great flux of refugees, in the 30s with the new housing.
I think complaining about where you live is a trait with everyone. I have
Yes.
Austrian friends who live in Vienna and complain about how dirty it is.
Okay. Yes, that's part of the game. So I also love these atmospheric entrances of the old apartment block, of apartment buildings. This is early 50s as well, in Kolonaki area, and I imagine all these entrances with all these aesthetics of the 50s being pronounced and polished, and I think the next generation maybe will cater for this heritage as well. So I conclude with the Reuters photo. This is not taken by me. I would be very proud if I could take this photo. But I'm sure that we're experiencing here that Athens is gaining attention, and I'm very close to what Diane said at the beginning of our discussion, that Athens is really a city to be explored. It's a very interesting city. First of all, one has to be interested in a city. I think it's and very often I'm wondering, if I were of a different nationality, would I be interested in visiting Athens? Well, I have no answer, but I think I would be interested, because I am interested in visiting other places as well. But because one has little expectations of contemporary city, I think this is very, very interesting to discover and have an answer for yourself. Well, I'm open to questions and comments. Yes. Yes, please.
Thank you very much. I
Thank
enjoyed
you.
that. I also enjoy walking around cities and taking lots of pictures of everything I see. And I haven't read your books yet, but I noticed that all the photos you showed us were buildings and houses and in and out of rooms. And one of the things I also enjoy looking at, as it were, in cities is the people, the living landscape.
Mhm.
You know, who is it who's living in these buildings or running these shops or serving
Yes.
in these restaurants? And I wonder if that's also something that you look at or have documented.
Yes. Thank you for your question. Yes, this is something of the things I wonder about as well. One of the great assets of writing in a newspaper is sometimes when I publish an article about a house that I don't know the history of, I get an email from someone who knows. As I met my friend today, and I have collected a lot of stories after publishing, let's say, a walk, and I have noticed, let's say, a building I don't know the history of. And I have collected some very, very touching stories about people that have grown those houses. Or they know, they have family memories, or they can fill in with information about the neighborhood, which is really fantastic. And sometimes they send me photos, or the original plans, or the house that they could see on the other side of the street, etc. Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I wanted to ask you, I know that you organize guided tours in Greek, gathering a lot of people. I know that. I wanted to ask you if you have organized or are organizing English.
Yes, I have been asked to guide some groups of foreign visitors, and I'm very open and willing to do that, of course. And
That's good.
yes,
Remember that.
and well, what I normally do with visitors or with people with basic knowledge about Athens, but even for Greeks, I think it's very interesting. I do the historic center of Athens. Let's say the main squares, Σύνταγμα, Ομόνοια, Πανεπιστημίου, Σταδίου, but not only the noteworthy buildings, everything. I like to talk about everything, and so to realize how this city developed. But I'm very open and...
Please inform me.
Yes, but we could also organize one with Lexikopoleio, if you like.
May I encourage you to do it in French too?
Well, you have to be very patient.
I
Je vais faire un effort pour toi. Merci.
I truly thank you. I truly
Thank you. You have any other comments or questions? Well, it was a great pleasure for me to share with you all these thoughts and photos. Diane, thank you so much.
Well, thank you. We have a reciprocal thing going. Nikos was very, very kind enough to introduce the book we wrote on Athens. So
It's a lovely book.
yeah. Well, this is true, and I have all your books going back to one of the ones. I think one that was. I don't know if it was the first huge hardback
Oh,
thing.
yes.
The Faces of Athens.
It's out of print now.
I have one.
Yes, thank you. So as we said, Athens is gaining attention. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.